Hey everyone, this is Exploring Fiction, and welcome back to another video. So guys, as you know, if you've been following my channel for a little while, I recently just finished reading all 5 books in A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. And so today, I'm going to stop and rank them from worst to the best, in my opinion. So before we get into this list, just remember, this is just my list. It's probably very different from yours, but if you want to talk about it, leave your list in the comments below. I'd love to have a discussion about these books because they are very fun to talk about, and I've had a lot of fun discussing with you on this channel already. So yeah, leave your list below if you disagree or if you agree. And another thing just to remember is that I'm only ranking the 5 mainline series books in A Song of Ice and Fire. I know that George R.R. Martin has written a bunch of prequels, sequels, spin-offs, whatever you call it, but I have not read any of those. I've just read the 5 books in the main series, so it's only going to involve those 5. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. And at number 5, I have A Feast for Crows. Now, of course, before I say anything else, I enjoyed every single one of the books in these series, but A Feast for Crows ranks at the bottom for me. And honestly, I have more fond thoughts of it now than I did when I first read it, but it still doesn't change the fact that it took all the storylines and point of views that I was interested in following and brought them to an abrupt halt to tell a completely different story, connected but all different from what I was used to. This book had no Daenerys, no Jon Snow, no Tyrion, and it focused mostly on Cersei and Brienne and Jaime. And look, I understand that it was natural and it was needed to focus on that side of the story to progress the plot overall, because there were important things happening here. It was just a jolting experience, going from a bunch of these characters I was super invested in to a bunch of characters I wasn't really as invested in, and having to read a whole book of them. However, it still wasn't a bad read, and it did progress the plot forward in interesting ways. Coming in at number 4, A Dance with Dragons. Now, I've heard one of two things about this book from people online. Either it was their favorite book in the series, or they thought it was an absolute drag. And honestly, I'm kind of in the middle. I thought this book did drag on at times. No pun intended, drag on, huh? But it also had a lot of good moments. Now, it did progress a lot of the plot points forward and do some very exciting things, but it did feel a little overwhelming with how many point of view characters there were, and I felt like it could have been condensed a little bit. Still, it was generally exciting. The ending made me more excited for what's to come. Coming in at number 3, A Clash of Kings. Now, this book was very exciting and fun for me, and there were a lot of great moments. We got introduced to Stannis finally after only hearing about him in the first book. We got to see some big battle scenes finally, such as the battle on the Blackwater. And, Jon Snow and Tyrion started really coming into their own as characters that I really liked to follow. And Arya also had a very interesting plot in this book. However, I still think out of the first 3 books, it was the most boring and dragged out. But it had a lot of redeeming qualities, and so I can't fault it very much for that. And coming in at number 2, A Storm of Swords. Now, if you watch my A Storm of Swords review, you'll know that I said this was by far and away my favorite book in the series, and that it was one of my favorite books of all time. And I still think this book is the most action-packed, the most well-paced, even though it's the longest, or second longest, I can't remember. And it has some of the most exciting moments in it. And I still agree it's one of the best books I've ever read. I just don't think it's the best looking back on it now. But it has some great moments. I mean, the Red Wedding, Jon Snow finally becoming the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch, Joffrey's death, Tywin's death. I mean, there's absolutely great stuff going on here, and this book is a complete thrill ride. It is a serious page turner, despite being very long, and I have nothing but praise for this book. That being said, it's still, after some reflection, it's not quite my favorite. And at the number 1 spot, A Game of Thrones. I just had to go back to putting this at number 1. I mean, the introduction to this amazing world and setting, these very complex characters, and just this very riveting political thriller style plot, this book has it all. Ned Stark is my favorite character in the entire series, even though this is the only book he's in. And I think even though it's an absolute travesty he was killed at the end of this book, it makes for a very surprising plot point, but one that creates a bunch of conflict that makes the other books even more interesting in many ways. But I just think overall, seeing the majority of this book through Ned's point of view, and him being like the only honorable man in a very dishonorable place, and him having to navigate these mysteries and the thrills of and betrayals of the king's court and everything going on there, I just think it makes for a great read, and it's not too long. I think it's the shortest book in the series, but it is an absolute pleasure to read from beginning to end. And because of Ned Stark, I'm ranking this book right above A Storm of Swords to occupy the number 1 spot in the series A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. So guys, leave your list below in the comments, and let me know what you thought of my list. Of course, it's just my list. I'm sure yours is different, but I'd love to hear what you have to say below. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video, subscribe if you're new here, I'd love to have you, and like always, I will see you next time.